Hey nerds, welcome back. And we're going to go into a little bit of a movie graphic novel combo, something that was very, very, very important to me growing up. An awesome, awesome story written and drawn by James O'Barr and then turned into a film starring Brandon Lee. And we're talking about The Crow. Some stories you read, they don't just kind of give you entertainment. They kind of change you, they mark you, and you can remember a time when you first read that story or you first watched that movie and you realize something different about storytelling. And that's what The Crow was for me. Reading that comic as a kid, I realized comics didn't just have to be Marvel and DC characters. This was a time where indie comics, as a result of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic book, you could realize that there was other comic book creators out there than just Marvel and DC. As a young kid, remember, I'm only maybe in junior high school at this time. So my understanding of the comic world is very minimal. So and reading that book definitely made me understand that other people can make and create comic books and not work for Marvel and DC, which was huge for me. Um, I was obsessed with comics, obsessed with martial arts. I grew up as a huge Bruce Lee fan. I love Bruce Lee movies. I love martial arts movies. That's definitely a huge 90s cliche. And because of that, I started following the film career of Brandon as he tried to step out of the shadow of his dad. And again, kind of reading this book and reading Ninja Turtles and then seeing Ninja Turtles come on the screen and then reading The Crow and hearing about that coming onto the movies, I started really understanding the correlation between storytelling and different mediums like comics and film and movies and TV. But reading this and watching that movie, my experiences to fiction were never the same. I understood it as deeper level, especially superhero genre, where things could be more deep and more meaningful. So I'll do a little bit of a background. I'm not going to go super deep, but if you don't know the story about The Crow, it wasn't launched as a franchise. It was born from a tragedy. James O'Barr, the writer of the comic, created that after losing his fiancée to a drunk driver, and it kind of became his vessel of grief. It wasn't a revenge fantasy in the shallow sense, but really how he weaponized, his sorrow into poetry. And in 1989, it was published by Caliber Press. It was drawn black and white. It was scratchy. It was expressionistic. It was violent. And it was very deeply painful and romantic. It was something like I had never seen before in a comic book. The character design of the Crow is what originally attracted me to it. I like the black and white nature of it. I like the face makeup. So that's what made me pick it up. It wasn't something that I was aware of. It was just visually striking. So that's what kind of drew me to it. If you're not aware of the plot of The Crow, it's about a character named Eric Draven who is murdered alongside his fiancée, Shelley. And a year later, he rises from the grave, guided by a mystical crow, and he avenges their deaths. He becomes this undead golem, knowing who he is, and he's not a brainless zombie, but he becomes like this magical creature that his sole purpose is to avenge his death and Shelley's death. Revenge isn't the point. It's about the grief. Again, remember, this is James O'Barr trying to work through the loss of his fiancée. Eric isn't cool. He's not a badass like the Punisher or other anti-heroes. He weeps, he dances alone, he hallucinates memories of love, and he hurts more than the violence he commits. He's invulnerable to damage. That's kind of like his superpower. So there is some super, powered coolness to this where he can be damaged heavily and survive, and makes him incredibly scary to the antagonist of the story who he's hunting down, one by one in order to enact his revenge. For a teenage reader, not understanding what I was really reading, looking back, I could see like the honesty of it and the anger and the isolation and those types of things you're going through as a teenager kind of resonating with teenagers of the time. And, again, this probably wasn't a comic book that a lot of teenagers picked up in the 90s. So they probably didn't become aware of it until the movie came out, which we'll get to. Again, The Crow was born of what was becoming an indie revolution in comics very slowly at the time, the 80s and the early 90s. Mirage Studios had, kind of taking the industry by storm with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then these other books were starting to come out. A lot of people were trying to duplicate that success. The Crow felt like it belonged there in that same revolution. What was unique about it, it was creator driven, it was personal and unfiltered. I don't feel like it was some type of cash grab to hop on the success of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is why it probably stood out from a lot of the other independent comic books of the time. For me, it meant everything. I love that book and continue to love it, and have probably watched the film a million times. So lo and behold, in 1994, The Crow hit the theaters. It was directed by Alex Proyas, starring Brandon Lee as Eric Draven, and the film was lightning in a bottle. We'll skip over a little bit of the news that came out while the movie was being filmed. So when the movie was released, Brandon had already passed. So obviously a lot of people were anticipating that. It got a lot of national news due to his death. But when the movie came out, it kept the emotional core of Obar's work. It shaped it into something cinematic and very mythic. I don't feel like it was a disrespectful adaptation at all. If anything, it enhanced it. I couldn't tell you which version of it I like more, because I consumed both projects kind of at the same time. The gothic atmosphere, with the rain-soaked Detroit city decay, it was iconic. It was definitely, the set itself was a character. Brandon Lee's performance was electric. He wasn't just brooding. He was tender, funny. The character was definitely haunted. He definitely embodied the Eric Draven that I knew from the comic. He had great iconic lines like,
"Can't rain all the time."
It didn't feel like a comic book. It didn't feel like he was trying to play a comic book superhero. One of the things I love most about it was, even though Brandon, had a great history of martial arts, obviously with the lineage from his dad, and had doing a lot of martial arts movies prior to The Crow, they didn't just make it like a martial arts action movie. Like, he wasn't doing jump kicks, he wasn't doing roundhouses. Like, he was fighting like a man possessed. It definitely was powerful the way he embraced the character. And if you ever seen any interviews with him, you could tell that this project was really important to him. He had his own charisma, his own intensity. He brought a lot of his dad's charm, but also, wasn't just a duplicate of his dad. And that was pretty amazing. And then unfortunately, the unthinkable happened. During filming, Brandon was accidentally shot due to a prop gun malfunction. He later died from his injuries. He was only 28 years old, the beginning of his career. He was definitely, there's an alternate universe where he survives this and becomes, I can absolutely see him being a very popular actor, whether it's in action or drama. He had the chops. He was definitely going to make it. So it was definitely a tragedy, not only because of a loss of life for his loved ones, but a loss of a career for people who would have enjoyed, his films. That it definitely sucks, on many, many, many reasons. And the parallels were chilling. You had an actor playing a man resurrected after being murdered, dying during the making of that story. This actually had a lot of repercussions on the original author, James Hobart, too. He felt so responsible, and there's a huge impact that was made to him with Brandon's death. They had become close on set, and it was as if he repeated the history and the responsibility that he felt, with the death of his fiancée. The film was completed. They did some rewrites, they did some stand-ins, they had some digital effects, but they were able to pull it off. It was definitely more than just a comic adaptation when it came out. It was definitely a memorial to Brandon, and it became a generational cult classic. It was huge, and probably both because of the tragedy of Brandon's death and the fact that the film was just excellent, and it permeated through pop culture of that time. Yeah, the Crow definitely imprinted itself on a generation. Goth culture certainly embraced it. Alternative rock fans embraced it. Comic fans embraced it. It was definitely a huge cult phenomenon. It was definitely sacred to a lot of the fans of the comic, but also the movies. The soundtrack was phenomenal, and it was definitely just as moody and atmospheric as the movie. Some great songs that came out of that. Some great bands. So that was just as popular as probably the movie itself. The film's legacy definitely endured. They did try to do lots of sequels to it, not having Eric as the main character, luckily, but nothing really captured the lightning of the first adaptation. A lot of them were pretty awful. There were a couple that kind of came close, but definitely not as stylish or sincere as the original. For me personally, it meant a lot to me on a lot of different levels. Obviously, being a huge fan of Bruce, being a huge fan of Brandon, I remember when I heard that he had died on the news, I was as if like it was the first time I think a celebrity or someone I didn't know uh, passed away where I felt like, personally moved. I was really upset as a kid. It broke my heart. I loved his movies. I loved his dad's movies. And I had thought I was going to have a lifetime of enjoying them. And I'm sure, my heart went out to him and his family and all the tragedy that they endured. Also, like, you had this independent comic that proved it could be more than just a superhero story or a goofy cartoon, and translating into other media, showing that creators can, reach movies and TV through different avenues. Um, yeah, it definitely showed me more that comic books didn't have to be about superheroes, and I didn't understand that either as a kid. Everything was Superman, Spider-Man, Hulk, Batman, and then I started reading more things, a lot more nuanced things, a lot different comics, and that hasn't stopped. Obviously, that's continued. Although I do like a lot of the junky pop culture too. Don't get me wrong, I still love it. But a lot of the stories, even in those, could be about surviving heartbreak, turning trauma into mythology, and some deeply human stories. The Crow isn't just an indie comic success story. It's proof that the most powerful art can often contain pain and can come from pain, but also be something that you can use to work out through your grief and turn it into ink and paper and film. Brandon turned that comic into something immortal. If you haven't seen the movie, if you haven't read the comic, I obviously recommend it highly. Um, if you're discovering comics beyond the mainstream, it's definitely something that should be in your stack of books to read. It's a darker world, a more honest one. But that story reminds us that like all things, you can overcome grief and sorrow and pain and loss. But yeah, go check out The Crow. Let me know what you guys think. Obviously, this one's super important to me. I enjoy it. I'm gonna go watch it now, actually. But drop in the comments. Keep liking, follow, subscribe. Let me know what you think about The Crow, or if there's any other independent comic books that struck you that I don't know about. Please recommend them. I'd love to read them. All right, everybody. Talk to you soon.